November 1963. A 12-year-old girl sat in the wings of a television studio watching her mother perform for millions of viewers. Liza Minnelli had seen her mother on stage hundreds of times, but tonight felt different. Between takes, when the cameras stopped rolling and the audience couldn't see, Judy Garland would rush off stage, her hands shaking, reaching for pills that a studio assistant kept in a small leather case. Liza watched silently, too young to fully understand but old enough to feel the weight of what she was witnessing. Years later, Liza would reveal what those backstage moments taught her about her mother, about Hollywood, and about the price of being Judy Garland's daughter. This isn't the story Judy's publicity team wanted told. This is what her daughter saw when the cameras turned away. To understand what Liza witnessed, we need to go back to the beginning of her consciousness, to the earliest memories of a childhood that was anything but normal. Born in 1946, Liza entered a world where her mother was already trapped in a system that had been exploiting her for over a decade. Judy's second marriage, to director Vincente Minnelli, brought Liza into existence, but it also brought her into the chaotic reality of living with someone whose life had been controlled by studios since childhood. Liza's earliest memory, shared in interviews decades later, was of her mother crying in a bathroom while people pounded on the door, demanding she come out for a scheduled appearance. Liza was perhaps 4 years old, sitting on the hallway floor outside, listening to her mother's sobs and the angry voices of handlers who saw Judy as a commodity that was malfunctioning. That image, a frightened child watching adults treat her mother like a broken machine, would define much of Liza's understanding of the entertainment industry. What made Liza's childhood particularly difficult was the constant instability. Judy's career lurched between triumphant comebacks and devastating collapses. When things were good, there was money for nice homes and elaborate gifts. When things were bad, which was increasingly often, there were sudden moves, unpaid bills, and the terrifying uncertainty of not knowing where they would live or how they would survive. Liza learned early that her mother's moods and stability were tied to forces beyond anyone's control: studio decisions, public opinion, the cruel economics of fame. By age 10, Liza had developed a role that no child should have to play. She became her mother's caretaker in ways both practical and emotional. When Judy couldn't function, lost in medication or depression, young Liza would try to manage the household. She would answer phones, make excuses to concerned adults, and attempt to maintain some semblance of normalcy. Former family friends recall seeing this child acting with a maturity that was heartbreaking in its necessity. But here's what Liza witnessed that revealed the true nature of Hollywood's exploitation. During Judy's television show in 1963 and 1964, Liza spent significant time at the studio. She saw how the production team would push her mother beyond reasonable limits, demanding take after take despite visible exhaustion. She watched studio executives calculate the profitability of each episode while seeming indifferent to the human cost. She observed the pills that kept her mother functioning, provided by professionals who surely understood they were perpetuating addiction. Liza later described one particular incident that crystallized her understanding. During a taping, Judy forgot her lyrics mid-song, something that rarely happened despite her problems. Instead of stopping production to give her a break, the director became angry, making comments within Liza's hearing about Judy being unprofessional and difficult. Liza, sitting in the shadows, wanted to scream at these adults that her mother had been working since childhood, that she was exhausted and sick, that maybe she deserved compassion rather than criticism, but she was 12 years old and powerless. What complicated Liza's experience was her own growing talent and ambition. She loved performing, had inherited remarkable abilities from both parents, and dreamed of her own career. But watching what show business had done to her mother created a terrible conflict. How could she pursue the same path that had destroyed the person she loved most? Yet how could she deny her own gifts and desires? This tension would shape Liza's entire life and career. As Liza entered her teenage years, the role reversals became even more pronounced. She found herself becoming the adult in their relationship, managing her mother's schedule, monitoring medication, trying to prevent the worst disasters. Friends from that period remember Liza calling them late at night, worried about her mother, seeking advice that no teenager should need. The burden of being Judy Garland's daughter was crushing in ways the public never saw. But Liza also witnessed moments of extraordinary beauty that complicated her understanding. When Judy was performing well, connecting with an audience, she became transcendent. In those moments, Liza saw why her mother couldn't quit despite everything. The stage represented the only place Judy felt truly valued and understood. The applause, the love from audiences, it was the validation she had never received from the industry that exploited her or the family members who often failed her. One story Liza shared years later reveals the depth of her mother's damage and her own childhood wisdom. After a particularly difficult performance where Judy had struggled vocally, she returned to the dressing room devastated, convinced she had failed. 14-year-old Liza told her mother something remarkable, that the imperfections made the performance more honest, that the audience connected with her humanity rather than technical perfection. In that moment, the child was teaching the adult a lesson about art and authenticity that Hollywood had never allowed Judy to learn. As Judy's health deteriorated through the late 1960s, Liza watched with growing horror and helplessness. She was launching her own career by then, finding success on Broadway, but the shadow of her mother's decline haunted her. She tried interventions, sought help from doctors, pleaded with her mother to get treatment, but the damage was too deep, the addiction too entrenched, the psychological wounds too severe. Liza learned the hardest lesson of all, that love alone cannot save someone from decades of systematic destruction. When Judy died in 1969, Liza was 23 years old. She had spent her entire life watching her mother suffer, trying to help, feeling responsible for problems that were never her fault. The grief was complicated by relief, by anger at the industry that had caused this tragedy, by guilt about her own survival and success. In interviews from that period, you can see Liza struggling to process emotions too complex for simple expression. What Liza revealed in subsequent years, as she gained perspective and distance, was how the entertainment industry had failed not just her mother, but their entire family. Studios that profited from Judy's talent provided no support structure for her children. Executives who exploited her addictions never considered the impact on the young girl watching from the wings. The system that created Judy Garland gave no thought to the collateral damage inflicted on those who loved her. Liza also spoke about the lasting impact on her own life and career. She became hyper-aware of the dangers her mother had faced, determined to maintain control over her own career in ways Judy never could. She fought for artistic autonomy, refused to be managed by predatory handlers, and built protections that her mother had never been allowed to have. In some ways, Liza's success represented a form of justice, proving that talent could survive and thrive when not subjected to the systematic abuse Judy endured. But the trauma never fully left. Liza developed her own struggles with addiction, her own health crises, her own complicated relationship with fame. Friends noted how she would sometimes pause before accepting work, as if calculating whether this opportunity would lead down the path that destroyed her mother. The legacy of being Judy Garland's daughter was not just about inherited talent, but inherited caution and inherited pain. In more recent years, as discussions about Hollywood exploitation became more public, Liza found herself in the difficult position of witness and spokesperson. She could testify to what the industry had done to her mother because she had seen it firsthand. But she also had to protect her own privacy and process her own trauma while satisfying public curiosity. Balancing these needs required navigation skills developed through a childhood spent managing impossible situations. What Liza's testimony reveals most powerfully is how exploitation ripples outward, affecting not just the direct victim, but everyone in their orbit. When studios destroyed Judy Garland, they also damaged her children, who grew up in chaos and instability. They damaged the relationship between mother and daughter, which should have been nurturing but became complicated by addiction and mental health crises. They created trauma that would echo across generations. Today, when Liza discusses her mother, there's a complex mixture of love, pain, pride, and anger. She celebrates Judy's artistry while acknowledging the damage. She honors her mother's courage while recognizing the tragedy. She has spent decades trying to separate the truth of her experience from the mythology that surrounds her mother's life. That effort at honest recollection represents its own form of bravery. The story of what Liza witnessed matters because it provides a perspective that official biographies cannot capture. She saw Judy not as a star or a scandal, but as a struggling human being who also happened to be her mother. She witnessed the exploitation from a unique vantage point, close enough to see every detail but powerless to stop it. Her testimony indicts not just individual bad actors, but an entire system that valued profit over human welfare and gave no thought to the children watching from the wings, learning lessons about power and cruelty that no child should have to learn.